truly.
It's not Granny's Brew, but the translation into Dutch of Granny Weatherwax's name is something like Oorschnie.
Okay.
Which is actually closer to earwax.
Okay.
But it does. I think there is a syllable of that translation that is sort of an antiquated name for, you know, maiden aunt who wears slippers all the time,
Gotcha.
and knits doilies and so on, and probably drives the Dutch equivalent of a Morris Minor.
Uh-huh.
Big sit up a big black bicycle.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the translation.
Umafis, that's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Umafit.
Yes.
Yeah. A nice black bike that just goes on. The book I just turned in, I did a science fiction novel. It's actually the first straightforward science fiction I've written. I don't count Star Trek because Star Trek is space opera, really.
Yeah.
I did a
Or
thing
religious.
I did a thing called Omnitopia, which will be coming out from Duane next year. And it is a book about an MMORPG set sort of maybe another 10 years long.
Yeah.
And the guy who runs the company, who is kind of like Bill Gates but nice. And, ooh, did I say that? Yeah. And one of his oldest players is a Dutch lady who goes by the handle of Stroopwafel. She also happens to be the Queen of the Netherlands.
Ah.
And I had to go down the royal family a little bit to pick which crown princess looked like a fair bet to succeed her mom. Now, it's an alternate universe anyway, and it doesn't count. But Stroop it's Princess Emily, is it? I need to double check. See who's next in line.
I don't know the Dutch royal family at all.
Yeah, yeah. But it seemed like
Except
fair
the way
bet. Because, and she turns up at the launch for, they're doing a huge rollout of some new alternate universes in this MMORPG. And she turns up there and says, you know, yours is the only country I live in as much as mine, to the guy whose game this is. But, you know, this lady would have grown up in the, you know, sort of late 1990s, early 2000s, and has been a gamer all her life. It was fun, though. Every time someone mentions Dutch stuff to me, I have her in mind all the time.
Can you just go back to the Star Trek books?
Sure.
Everybody knows that it was the original idea was Wagon Train to the Stars. It started in 1966. Gene Roddenberry, the ex-Air Force pilot, and so on. Do you feel at all constrained in how you write when you write for the Star Trek books?
No.
Not really. The only thing that you have to bear in mind is that you can't have any permanent changes. So it has to be the entire episode from page 1 to the end. And the end has to be a complete resolution of that episode, that novel. Because the novels are not canon. They're like plastic phasers and Captain Kirk action figures. Now, sometimes you will find that ideas that have been used in novels will pop up in movies, and then they do become canon, but they're not credited. They're not individually credited to the writers because at this stage there are more than 150 Trek books.
Oh, it's going to be more than that.
More than that?
It's going to be a lot more than that.
But the last time I checked, it was somewhere in the region of 250.
I would guess.
And that's just from the original series, TNG and the S9.
Yeah, it's a fair bet. But the way to write a good Star Trek novel is to, while you keep an eye on the constraints, I mean, you have to play in the sandbox.
With the toys provided.
Yeah.
But you're allowed to be as creative and committed as you feel like inside the sandbox. You can't, ideally, when you're writing a book, that novel should be your central characters, the most important thing that has ever happened in their life. Now, when you're working in a licensed property, that's tough. You're not going to be able to do that. But you can lavish as much care on whatever episode you're telling from that character's life as you would normally lavish on a book whose character, that was their only outing and you were not going to see them again. If my books have wound up for Star Trek on the New York Times bestseller list, it's because I wrote them as if that was the only chance those characters were going to have. That was their moment in the sun. You have to be respectful of the history and the material that you're basing the licensed work on. But at the same time, you are allowed to write it as well as you can. And the ones that succeed are the ones where the writer just writes out of his or her skin, despite the fact that you're being paid what would sometimes not be comparable for what you would get for a book of your own. If you're going to take the king's shilling, as they would say at the UK end of things, you have a responsibility to do it as well as you can.
Yeah.
You have the responsibility to do it as well as if you own the property, and they didn't. Those books stand out. And generally speaking, the licensed works that don't stand out are the ones where someone said, I'm just going to do this for the money. Even in the ancient day, when pay for a Star Trek book was better than it is now, the books that stood out even then were the ones where the writer was not concerned about how much they were being paid. They were concerned about doing a good job.
Mike Ford's Final Reflection.
Yeah, Mike Ford's Final Reflection. Also, How Much for Just the Planet, which is one of the great titles.
If you've never read it, it's basically Gilbert and Sullivan meets Star Trek with a Max Sennett pie fight thrown in at the end.
And a lot of people can't cope. A lot of people are unwilling to allow a Star Trek novel to be so unreservedly funny. And
This
witty
despite the fact that
as
one of the
that
most
was.
popular original series episodes was The Trouble with Tribbles.
Yes.
And that was hilarious.
Yeah.
But it's so funny that as time has gone on, hardline Trek fans, Trekkies, Trekkers, whatever, have got very rigid about what is and is not acceptable as Trek. And a sense of humour seems to have fallen away.
But even fanfickers get that way, and you've seen it. And the sense of humor seems to have completely withered, crumpled, and fallen to the ground. Original Trek was apparently a very funny place to work, a humorous place if you look at their menus, memos. As you go on later through newer series of Trek, as it becomes more expensive.
Well, next
The
the writing department of Star Trek: The Next Generation during its first season was popularly considered to have a revolving door.
Truly.
Because they went through writers at such a rate.
Ron Moore still has the giant sheet of butcher paper on which the names of all the writers who came in to work for The Next Generation. When you signed on, you signed in, and there were like 150 names of writers who came to work on staff and then left because they couldn't bear it, or were fired because somebody up above did not like them. Ron, and then Gene himself was kicked upstairs, and things were changing.
He was made a peer and sent to the House of Lords.
Yeah, really. It was not a pleasant place to work, and it was known for that all over Hollywood. So those who escaped were happy. We were all staff writers there. We escaped that fate. Thank God.
While we were living in LA, the folks we were living with, Michael came up with the Star Trek original series idea, which was so close to Diane's Star Trek novel, The Wounded Sky, that he asked her to be co-writer on the screenplay of the episode.
Cool.
And that turned out to be sufficiently popular that he and me, were being seriously considered to be invited in as staff writers because we live quite locally. And that, I think, would have been the end of the marriage.
Yeah. We would have rich,
we would have been quite rich, but it would have all gone in alimony and divorce settlements.
You're on.
So that was a near squeak. It was not writing for fun. That's what writing is all about, really.
It got better.
Yeah. It's going to be, what, 24 years in February?
Yeah.